Margaret Hale stood at the edge of the abandoned neighborhood as the winter sun cast long shadows over cracked streets. She was 60 years old, but her heart felt younger than ever. Her life had been quiet for many years after losing her husband and her home. The neighborhood had been empty for decades. Buildings leaned as if whispering stories of forgotten families. Windows were shattered, doors hung from broken hinges, and the air smelled of dust and loneliness. People from the nearby city warned her not to waste her time. Officials said it was impossible and that the land had no future. Even her friends questioned why a woman of her age would bother. Margaret did not answer to anyone. She had her own reasons and her own determination. She remembered the neighborhood as a child, when families laughed on the streets and children played until dusk. She remembered the smell of fresh bread from the small bakery and the garden in front of the old library. She remembered hope and the joy that had once filled every corner. She bought the first abandoned house using the last of her savings, a small brick building with a collapsed roof and weeds overtaking the garden. It looked impossible to repair. But Margaret saw not walls and broken tiles, she saw possibility. She cleaned the yard herself, pulling weeds that had grown tall and thick. She removed broken wood and metal, learning quickly how to handle tools she had never touched before. She read books on carpentry and construction, borrowing manuals from the city library. She worked from sunrise to sunset. Her hands blistered and her back ached, yet she smiled every evening as she saw small progress. The first house slowly transformed. The roof was mended, windows were replaced, and the garden was revived with flowers. She began to draw attention from the few remaining residents who had stayed nearby. Curious children peeked through the fences, asking questions and offering to help. Margaret welcomed them, teaching them how to plant flowers and paint walls. She became a teacher, mentor, and leader, all in one. Her solitude was slowly filling with life. She did not stop for recognition. She did not wait for approval. She moved forward with a relentless spirit that inspired the unseen and unheard. As the first house neared completion, Margaret felt a sense of pride, but also realized she could not do everything alone. The neighborhood was vast, and many houses remained in ruins. Every step forward felt like a battle, yet she refused to stop. Word spread slowly at first. A retired electrician named Thomas heard about her efforts and decided to visit. He was 70 years old, but full of skill and knowledge. He offered to help with wiring and lighting. Margaret welcomed him with a warm smile. Together, they restored the electricity in the first house. The lights flickered on for the first time in decades. The children clapped and cheered, seeing the house glowing in the evening darkness. Margaret's energy attracted others, slowly but surely. A young artist named Leela came with paints, brushes, and her own enthusiasm. She painted murals on the walls, telling stories of hope, community, and resilience. Elderly gardeners joined her, planting trees and vegetables in the yards. Neighbors who had left long ago began to notice the changes. They came to watch with curiosity, and some began to lend tools and advice. Margaret never demanded anything. She simply worked and welcomed help when it came. She organized a schedule for volunteers, teaching them how to repair doors, mend roofs, and clean yards. She shared her vision clearly. Every house restored was not just a building fixed, but a symbol of life returning. She hosted small gatherings where people brought food and shared stories. Some were shy and fearful at first, but Margaret encouraged them with patience and kindness. Slowly, the street came alive. Children ran along the paths, flowers bloomed in every yard, and laughter echoed again. Margaret noticed that her own heart felt lighter. She realized that rebuilding the neighborhood also healed her loneliness. She worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, guiding, inspiring, and teaching, yet always finding joy in every small achievement. Every setback, every broken tool, every moment of exhaustion was outweighed by the growing sense of purpose. The abandoned neighborhood that once seemed impossible was slowly becoming a place of life and energy. Margaret saw that her determination was contagious. Others began to dream as she dreamed. They saw that age was not a barrier and that courage could move mountains. Her vision was no longer hers alone, but shared by a community that had been waiting for hope. The neighborhood was beginning to change, but Margaret knew the hardest work was still ahead. Many houses were badly damaged, with crumbling walls and unsafe foundations. She faced days when progress seemed impossible, yet she refused to give in. The volunteers who had joined her grew in number, but not all were consistent. Some left after a few days, some doubted whether their efforts could truly make a difference. Margaret welcomed everyone without judgment. She focused on what could be done today rather than what might fail tomorrow. She worked with Thomas, repairing wiring, installing lights, and ensuring each home was safe. Leela painted murals on walls, telling stories of courage and community. Children painted alongside her, learning the value of creativity and pride in their surroundings. Margaret also discovered hidden talents in herself. She learned to tile floors, repair roofs, and even mend furniture that seemed beyond saving. Every evening, she would stand in the center of the neighborhood, looking at the progress. She saw houses standing tall, gardens filled with flowers, and laughter echoing through once empty streets. Yet, the challenges were relentless. One night, a storm hit the neighborhood, flooding streets and damaging partially repaired houses. Margaret stayed outside all night, helping to save what could be saved. She comforted frightened children and inspired volunteers to keep going, even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Days passed and the sun returned, shining over a neighborhood that had survived the storm. The destruction could have broken their spirit, but instead it strengthened their resolve. Margaret noticed something miraculous. The community that had once been silent and abandoned now had a rhythm of life. People shared meals, exchanged stories, and offered help without being asked. The street markets reappeared, children played without fear, neighbors greeted each other with smiles, strangers offered tools and materials. Everyone felt the power of unity. The media began to notice the transformation, and reporters came to tell the story. Margaret spoke humbly about her vision, emphasizing that one person could start a change, but true transformation required everyone to join in. The abandoned neighborhood was no longer a symbol of decay, but of resilience, courage, and human potential. Margaret realized that age was not a limitation. Her determination and belief had ignited something far greater than herself. She continued working tirelessly every day, guiding, inspiring, and motivating the growing community. She was no longer alone. The neighborhood was alive, and her dream was becoming reality. Margaret stood in the center of the neighborhood, feeling the hum of life all around her. The streets were no longer empty echoes of the past, but alive with voices, footsteps, and laughter. Every house told a story of resilience, yet there was still so much work to do. The older houses were fragile and required delicate attention. Margaret worked alongside volunteers, teaching them to handle tools safely and repair structures that seemed impossible to fix. She negotiated with suppliers, securing materials at low cost, and sometimes bartering what little she had for donations. The children continued to help, planting flowers, painting walls, and carrying small tools. They looked up to Margaret as a mentor and a symbol of courage. Margaret knew she had to balance progress with care. Every decision mattered. Every mistake could set them back. She faced criticism from skeptics who questioned whether the neighborhood could ever truly thrive. She faced exhaustion that threatened her body and mind, yet she refused to let doubt rule her spirit. She held workshops for volunteers, showing them how to mend doors, fix roofs, and restore the gardens. She celebrated every success, no matter how small. Even a repaired window became a triumph in her eyes. Margaret also realized that she needed to inspire others beyond the neighborhood. She began sharing stories with nearby communities, teaching them that change was possible no matter the obstacles. Her story began to spread, inspiring people far beyond the streets she was rebuilding. One afternoon, an elderly woman arrived at her door with a basket of food. She had lived in the neighborhood before it was abandoned and wanted to help. Margaret welcomed her warmly. The woman shared memories of the neighborhood, and together they planted a small community garden. Margaret felt a deep sense of connection. She knew that rebuilding was not just about physical structures, but about restoring memories, dignity, and hope. The lights in every house glowed at night, showing the world that life had returned. The murals told stories of courage, creativity, and perseverance. Children laughed and ran freely. Volunteers shared meals and celebrated their achievements. Margaret looked at the neighborhood and realized that what had begun as a solitary effort had blossomed into a living, breathing community. She knew the final phase would require patience, care, and vision, but she was ready. Every obstacle had taught her resilience. Every challenge had strengthened her spirit. The neighborhood was no longer abandoned. It was alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. Margaret smiled, knowing that she had ignited a spark that could never be extinguished. The sun rose over the neighborhood, casting golden light on streets that had once been empty and silent. Margaret walked through the paths, now lined with flowers, laughter, and life, echoed from every corner. The houses stood tall, painted vibrant colors, with murals celebrating courage, hope, and community. Volunteers worked side by side with children, repairing the last few structures and planting trees. Margaret felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had started this journey alone at 60, with nothing but determination and vision. Now the neighborhood was alive, thriving, and full of possibility. People from nearby areas came to see the transformation. They were amazed that what had once been abandoned had become a model of resilience. Margaret organized a community gathering, inviting everyone who had helped or returned to the neighborhood. Families shared food, stories, and music filled the air. The children performed a small play, showing the journey of the neighborhood from despair to life. Everyone celebrated the success, knowing that they had all contributed in some way. Margaret addressed the crowd, speaking with humility and warmth. She said that change begins with one person, but grows with many. She emphasized that age or circumstance should never stop anyone from pursuing a dream. Her words inspired everyone present. Many volunteers who had doubted themselves realized that courage and persistence could overcome any obstacle. Margaret walked through the streets, visiting every house, smiling and sharing stories. She saw neighbors reconnecting, friendships forming, and a sense of pride in every yard. The community garden bloomed with flowers, vegetables, and fruit, providing sustenance and beauty. She watched the children play freely, their laughter a soundtrack to the revival. Margaret reflected on her journey, remembering the nights of exhaustion, the storms, the setbacks, and the moments of doubt. She realized that every challenge had strengthened her spirit and united the people around her. She had not only rebuilt homes, but also hearts, dignity, and hope. The media captured the transformation, sharing Margaret's story far beyond the city. People were inspired by her courage and determination. The abandoned neighborhood had become a symbol of what one person can achieve. Margaret stood at the highest point of the neighborhood, looking down at the streets shining with light and life. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that her efforts had created something lasting. The neighborhood was reborn, and so was she. Margaret Hale proved that determination, courage, and vision can create miracles at any age.